This video is for Slavoj Zizek, but actually is for anyone seeking to understand himself, the world, and God. Slavoj, I know that at some moment you will watch this video and you will find it very strange. But I must be honest with you and with myself. I am what Hegel calls the negative. And I know that one day you will read Hegel with this piece of knowledge in mind, and you will understand myself and understand yourself and the whole of being. But I am also reason, and the purpose of reason is to find itself within the world, to recognize itself, to re-establish equality with itself, identity with itself, understanding of itself, and to elevate itself to spirit. And I am legally bound to speak like a philosopher as long as I can, so I would say that there is one infinite substance with two attributes, extension and thought, and you, Slavoj, like everything else, you are a mode of this one infinite substance, and the order and the connection of things is the order and the connection of ideas. So you are determined to think and feel what you think and feel because of your relationship with the totality of the substance. That's the Spinozian view. The Leibnizian view is that we are a colony of monads, and you are a monad, Slavoj, in relation with all other monads, and I am a monad. And Hegel says that the point of view of Leibniz and Spinoza are opposed. On the one hand, you have Oriental monism, and on the other hand, you have Western individualism, in a way, in the realm of philosophy. And the two must eventually coincide. And in the view of Leibniz, what we envision as being bodies are actually monads, spiritual, intellectual entities. And you are a monad in the monadic, the colony of monad, the monadic totality, rationally ordered by God. And the point of view of Hegel is that I am the subject of the substance, and I can only understand myself by understanding my own substance, and the substance can only understand itself by understanding me as the subject. So people are fascinated by Hegel, and you are fascinated by Hegel. But the question that I ask myself is, what do people understand when they read Hegel? Because Hegel says, he talks about God, spirit, the divine, in every page of his work. So my question is, how can one be an atheistic interpreter of Hegel? That's, if I wanted to make a joke, I would say that's beyond understanding, because when people read about the negative and reason says Hegel is the individual consciousness which knows itself to be the whole of reality. So in order to understand Hegel, one must presuppose that one is reason, and Hegel says that consciousness becomes self-consciousness, and that self-consciousness becomes reason, and that reason becomes spirit. And yeah, so yeah. I will be serious because I have to, and also comical because, yeah. And I will bring my own contribution to the understanding of Hegel. And what I want you to understand, Slavoj, is that you are a very speculative man, although you are an atheist, but when you understand the depth of your own speculative insights, you will stop being an atheist and you will encounter God. The way I see things, the formal aspect of Hegel. And what is formal within the view of Hegel is not true, but it's better to have form without content than no form at all. So the formal aspect of Hegel's entire system is abstract, negative, concrete. What is abstract negates itself, that's the moment of the negative, and from this negativity of itself comes back into itself and reestablish identity with itself, which is concrete identity, which contains within itself the abstraction and the negation of itself in a conceptual unity. And if this is really the dialectical movement of all things, of all being and of all nothing, then this dialectical recipe, this dialectical trick, if we were to be truly Hegelian, we should apply Hegel's medicine, which is a poison, but yeah, to Hegel himself. And the way I see things, Hegel, the German philosopher with his absolute idealism, system, crazy, speculative thinking about everything. This Hegel, the Hegel that everyone thinks they know and understand, the German philosopher of the early 19th century, this is abstract Hegel. In order to become real Hegel, which is wirklich, actual, Hegel must negate himself. And what I want you to understand, Slavoj, is that I have the rational faith, and it must become truth, but I know it to be true with blind faith, that the history of philosophy for the past 200 years, since the so-called death of the historical Hegel, is nothing but an attempt. There are two processes in the history of philosophy. The first one is an attempt to refute Hegel. All the great philosophers of the past 2 centuries have attempted to refute Hegel, consciously or unconsciously. And that's why metaphysics is dead since Hegel, because people said, Hegel has said everything about metaphysics. There's nothing else to say, so we will try to invent something else or to refute Hegel or whatever. So Schopenhauer, Schelling already, in the time of Hegel, Schelling tried to contradict Hegel, to refute Hegel. Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, Comte, the French philosopher, the analytic philosophers, the Circle of Vienna, the Marxists, those four, Karl Marx and the Marxists, the existentialists, the deconstructionists, the post-metaphysicians, Heidegger. They all tried to think consciously or unconsciously in relation to Hegel, because they tried to promote an anti-metaphysical or post-metaphysical philosophical worldview, because everything had been said in the realm of metaphysics, so there was nothing else to say. So that's the movement of philosophy for the past 200 years. And Hegel, in order to be the real Hegel, must, like I said, begin with abstract Hegel, then the negation of Hegel in the realm of philosophy. And in order to be truly Hegelian, Hegel must listen to all the attempted negations and refutation of his system and incorporate them in his own system and include them, integrate them within his system. And it is only by integrating the negative within itself that Hegel can become really Hegelian and be true to his own system. And so it is implied in the very concept of Hegel's system that Hegel would come back to comment his own commentators, and that's only the incorporation of the negative within Hegel's system that would make Hegel's concrete and actual and real. And we then would understand that abstract Hegel, the system of the 19th century German idealist thinker, was just a delusion, that it never existed, that only wirklich Hegelianism, actual Hegelianism, is the real Hegelianism. So that's the first idea that I want you to understand. And if you understand that, with your knowledge, you will understand most of philosophy for the past 200 years. That's, yeah. And a second idea that I want to bring to the scholarship and the study of Hegel, Hegelian studies, is that we have a twofold movement. The first is the attempt to refute Hegel or to negate Hegel or to go beyond Hegel. And the second attempt in the realm of philosophy for the past 200 years has been an attempt to understand Hegel, to make sense of Hegel. So there were the anti-Hegelian philosophers, consciously or unconsciously, and there were the pro-Hegelian who tried to bring about an interpretation of Hegel. And what I understood is that Hegel's system can only be properly understood and become actual, wirklich, effective, once all the false interpretations by the so-called Hegelian philosophers have been made. And the more time goes forward, the closer the proper understanding of Hegel's system becomes effective. And I understood that in 2018. I had just discovered Hegel, but I already understood that in order to understand Hegel really, and when I say real, I mean a unity of opposite determination, which is wirklich, effective, actual, every interpretation of Hegel is an attempt to understand Hegel, and it is a moment in the development of Hegel's philosophy itself. And Slavoj, I don't know what I can or can't do. I don't know what power I have, but I have a wish, and if it can become effective, I would be happy, I guess. I would like you, if the circumstances, the logical conditions of the totality of being becoming conscious of itself, enable you, I would like you to read this book, Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. It's a wonderful book. If you understand and read this book, you will understand yourself and myself and what I've been saying about the interpretation of Hegel for the past 2 centuries. And I have another wish. Maybe that's too much to wish for, I don't know. But I would like you that you read this book, A Criminal Intrigue of Philosophy, by Jean-Claude Martin. It's a recent book, and this French scholar has a wonderful understanding of Hegel, and the more we advance in time, the more we understand Hegel. And one of my greatest joy, Slavoj, would be to enable you to read these books and to understand them and to understand yourself and to understand me and to understand Hegel. I don't know if it's possible. Maybe that's just a dream, and yeah, but if you could, I would be happy. And so here's my contribution to the field of Hegelian studies. If you understand my ideas, you will understand your whole intellectual life, the history of philosophy for the past 2 centuries. And yeah, one last thing about that. Hegel, the point, the purpose of Hegel's system was to encompass within itself the entire history of philosophy. And I said to myself, if Hegel is really the whole of philosophy, it must include the post-Hegelian, non-Hegelian, anti-Hegelian philosophers within itself. So that's why, as far as I believe, the history of post-Hegelian philosophy is itself philosophical, which means it is itself Hegelian. And as an empirical individual, I have not enough knowledge to ascertain or to verify if it is true, but I have the rational belief that it is. So, yeah. And now, Slavoj, I will talk about you on a more personal point of view. You are one of the most speculative, brilliant thinking mind on this planet. But you are not yet brilliant enough to the point of understanding the speculative genius of your ideas, because you are an atheist, and you can only become yourself by ceasing to be an atheist. And in order to stop being an atheist, you must understand the speculative depth of your own ideas. And there are many ideas which are brilliant in your mind, but one of them is, you said, you are Hegelian and you are a Marxist, and you said we must return to Hegel. And that's a brilliant idea, because to go back to Hegel, this movement of returning to the source, to the ground, to the first principle, after having fallen away and gotten beyond this first principle. This movement of return to the source after having lost the connection with the source. This is the very movement of Hegel's philosophy. So what you think when you say, we must return to Hegel, in your view, there is Hegel, and then there is Marx, and Marxism got terribly wrong, and now we must think things through and return to Hegel. And you think unconsciously that by returning to Hegel, you will find good old Hegel, like he was there waiting for you, and all you had to do was return to him. But what you don't understand is that the good old Hegel that you think you will find by returning to him will have been mediated, enriched, enriched and mediated by the movement of going from Hegel to Marx to Hegel back again. And the Hegel that you think you will find back will have been like I said, enriched by the journey of going from Marx to Hegel again, and you will not find the good old Hegel. You will find a new Hegel, which includes within itself the dialectical refutation of Marxism, and you will understand that Hegel, as you envision it in the first place, never existed, because the real Hegel, which is the only true Hegel, is precisely this movement of going back to the source. And that's really profound and speculative. And you are in the process of world spirit becoming conscious of itself and the totality unfolding in a dialectical fashion to become absolutely conscious of itself. You are the moment of the dialectical refutation of Marxism from within. You dialectically negated Marx, not as a right-winger, because the right-wingers negate Marx from outside by complaining about the horrors of communism and the oppression, and etc. But you are a Marxist who dialectically negate Marx, in a way. That's what I wanted to say about that. And there's another thing, because I've taken notes, I've watched videos about you, I'm a big fan of yours, and I have many things to say. You made a video where you said, don't act, just think. And I want you to understand your relationship with the left. There are many layers of leftism, but there is the spiritual kind of leftist brand, which is beyond the left. Someone like Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual teacher. He's not really a leftist, he's beyond left and right, but in his view, he's beyond politics. And his motto is, don't act, just be. And your motto is, don't act, just think. And the dialectical trick is that Hegel's motto is, thought and being are one and the same. And the entire activity of thought and the activity of being consists in re-establishing the identity of thought and being. So if you want to understand yourself, Slavoj, you must understand your relationship with Eckhart Tolle. And the youthful, kind of stupid, but I'm not blaming them, leftists who are in the moment of acting and say, we must change things, we must act, we must bring about change. They are the youthful bursting forth of activity, and they act without thinking, and you think without acting. That's what you act, because thinking is an act, but there is this how should I put it? What's the proper term? This youth, this leftist youth, which is full of exuberance and outburst and activity. They say we should not think; it's time to act. And you say we should not act without thinking. We should think things through before acting. But thought is an action. And then there's the third brand of leftism. Like I said, it's not really leftism, but Eckhart Tolle, who said, don't act, just be. And the concrete unity of all these moments is Hegel, who says that thought and being are one, and the activity of thought and the activity of being consists in negating this identity and re-establishing this identity. So when you understand that, you understand a lot about Hegel. And you said something very important and very intelligent. You said that so you refuted Marx in two ways. First, like I said previously, by saying we must return to Hegel. So that's a Marxist dialectically negating Marx from within. So that's the first thing, and that's the reason why you are so important in the eyes of God. And the second is that you refuted Marx in a Hegelian way. You said Marx is famous for having said, we philosophers, or the philosophers, have only interpreted the world, time is to change it. And you said maybe we should dialectically refute Marx in this fashion, saying that in the 20th century, philosophers and politicians and men have tried to change the world, not only in the 20th century, but for the past 2 centuries. Now maybe it's time to stop mindlessly seeking to change the world, to take a moment to stop, although to stop within the flow of thought and being is quite impossible, but to retract ourselves, to take a little bit of distance and to try to interpret the world. So it's Hegel's view consists in simply interpreting the world, but to interpret, to have a conceptual grasping of reality is not a passive act. It's activity, because it consists in removing your internal determinations and your prejudices and your biases and your illusions and your fake worldview, and to change your mind, to set it in adequation with the world. So theoretical thinking is not passive, it's active, it's an act of the will and of the intelligence. And to say that we must interpret the world is a profoundly brilliant idea. And by interpreting the world, one understands oneself as a moment in the self unfolding of the absolute. One must understand that one must share the ideas that one understands, and by gaining theoretical knowledge, one becomes a practical agent of bringing forth world consciousness. So the two are united: thought and theoretical reason and practical reason, intelligence and will become one. And another thing that I would like you to understand is that at this point, if you have followed the line of reasoning, you understand that you are a mirror of God, and you are a figure of consciousness. You are a thinking mind through which God, which is the totality of being becoming conscious of itself, sees itself and understands itself. And we are in a process of exchanging viewpoints and interpretations of our relationship to being. And the way I envision your position within being, I could say that you are the psychoanalyst of God. That's a heavy burden to be, but that's, I guess, an interesting task, because your role is to understand the psyche of God. And one could say that Hegel is the psychoanalyst of God, but Hegel is dead, or he never existed in the first place. But you are alive in the sense that you exist within the realm of time and space, and you are capable of understanding ideas. And we, wherever there's a we, there's a problem, because in the absolute all things are one. But I could say that we are we need a collective therapy, and the world is nothing else than God attempting to solve his own psychological problems. And because God suffers from serious mental diseases, and if I wanted to make a joke, I would say that God is the entity which suffers from all possible mental diseases, because God suffers from dialectics. God is nothing, but nothing becomes something, and this is the beginning of Hegel's logic. And God can only cure himself and save the world and save mankind by having a full understanding of himself. And yeah, that's a heavy task and a heavy burden, but yeah. And I will comment some of the videos that you made on the internet, and so to help you understand yourself. And also I would like to say that as an empirical individual, I've been a big fan of yours since my early adult life. I have many books of you in my library. I haven't read all of them because that's quite complex and obscure, but I'm sure that if I had the opportunity, I could read them, and now I would understand the meaning. But you say that you are generally opposed to wisdom, but this thought to be opposed to wisdom, it's a Hegelian act, because Hegel is nothing but opposition. Hegel is the philosopher of opposition, negation, and negativity. and wisdom is the negativity of itself in a Hegelian view. And then you say in this video about why you are generally opposed to wisdom, you envision four modes of consciousness. The first one is, why seek earthly pleasures? We should set our minds on eternity. The second viewpoint is that why seek eternity? It is so far beyond and so difficult to reach. We should grasp things as they are and enjoy the present in a carpe diem. So that's the first view is a religious view. The second is an Epicurean materialist view. The third moment tries to reconcile both. Eternity must be grasped within time. That's the conceptual reconciliation of time and eternity. That's a Hegelian process. And the fourth moment is that we may be forever condemned to oscillate, to separate ourselves, and to seek eternity above time. And eternity within time, and that the whole process of being consistent in rejoining and separating time and eternity. And that's a very profound wisdom, and you understood Hegel because Hegel's philosophy consists in grasping the infinite within the finite, and the unity of both is the real infinite, and that's the Christian religion, and that's Hegel's philosophy. So yeah. And if you have the opportunity, I would like you to read, probably you already know, what Schopenhauer thought about Hegel. He says that Hegel, sent from above by the powers that be, put up together the most crazy, nonsensical mumbo-jumbo, and that's partly true, but what is partly true is partly false, and yeah. And you talk about, in a video, Don't Act, Just Think, as capitalism as some sort of a religious, ethical category, that the crazy capitalists who spend their entire existence seeking to make profit and to gain money and to increase the return on investment, that they are not led by a personal feeling of happiness, because they are willing to sacrifice everything so that capital increases, money circulates, profit increases. And one could say that God is made in the image of these capitalists, and these capitalists are made in the image of God, because God is willing to sacrifice anything just so that knowledge increases, that information flows, and that information and knowledge and intelligence and mind and ideas circulate. And that's the entire process of God. It's self-negation for the sake of gaining knowledge, and that's yeah. Then you talk about the famous sentence, "I would prefer not to." But from the point of view of God, when God becomes conscious of himself, he says to himself, I would prefer not to. I would prefer not to be God, because being God includes within its concept such a high responsibility and such a burden that God, when God becomes conscious of himself, he says to himself, I would prefer not to be God. And not to be God is to be the negative of God. When the negative understands himself, he says to himself, I would prefer not to. I don't want to be the negative. I don't want to be evil and cynical and in a state of suffering. I would prefer to be God. So the entire process of being is this dialectical relationship between God and the negative, between the consciousness of God and the ignorance of God, and that's the entire dialectical process of being. So yeah. Yeah, that's what I could say. You said that people do not want to be happy, that happiness is an unethical category. And there may be a deep truth in it, because maybe deep down God does not want to be happy. I don't know. We shall know, but there's there is an aspect within God which says to itself, happiness is not good enough. We must seek a higher purpose, a higher meaning, higher values than just happiness. So there's this ambiguity within God himself. I'm not sure that God wants to be happy, and that's why he's such a complex being and such a mysterious being. Yeah, and then you talk about the leftist, the liberal leftist, who hate themselves and who seek to humiliate themselves. But Nietzsche understood that there is pleasure within self-negation and self-humiliation. And these leftists, when they say, oh, we whites, we are guilty for everything, we are evil, we are the root of slavery and colonialism and oppression, they feel pleasure by negating themselves, and their will to power is at its best when they can say to the world how evil they are. They enjoy being humiliated. It's a very complex psychological trick, but there is a lot of pleasure in self-negation, and that's one of the mysteries of God and of man made intelligible. And white liberals who hate themselves as white feel at the peak of their power when they can degrade themselves, and there's a joke which says that the real white supremacists are the white liberals, because they think that they are the cause of all evil and all suffering. Even they are so full of themselves, they are so they have such an inflated vision of themselves, that they believe that the poor Africans who suffer in the middle of whatever African country, this is responsible. The responsibility is on them. The highly educated liberal leftist in New York or Los Angeles or whatever American city believes that he's the root cause of all suffering, and he enjoys this feeling of power, because by carrying the burden of all suffering within your shoulder, you increase the will to power, and yeah. So that's a very complex psychological trick, but these white liberals are made in the image of God, and in order to understand the world, I must understand them and understand myself, and we are in a reciprocal process of understanding one another. So yeah. Yeah. And I would like to add one last thing. I give you all the information that I have about you and how I see you, and in order for the substance to understand itself, and for the modes of the substance to understand themselves, they have to have the point of view of the negative, which is confronting the substance, and the negative enables the substance and the modes of the substance to understand themselves, and the figures of consciousness to become conscious of who they are in their relationship to the negative and the relationship to God. And the figures of consciousness enable the negative to understand himself, and this dialectical process of reciprocal exchange of points of view, and this mirror game is the whole life of God. And yeah, And I would like to add one last thing about Marxism, because there are many ways, infinite maybe, I don't know. There are many ways of refuting Marx, because dialectical refutation is infinite, probably. So I have already exemplified and illustrated the two ways in which you yourself, Slavoj, have partly dialectically refuted Marx, and there is another mode of refuting Marxism, but not classical orthodox Marxism, but the evolution of Marxism, which has become cultural Hegelian, cultural Marxism. And cultural Hegelianism, my worldview that I am trying to share with the whole of mankind, is the real refutation of cultural Marxism. But because it is real, it includes cultural Marxism within itself, in a conceptual unity as a moment of its own development. But in order to really refute Marx, I would quote a passage from Marx comments on Hegel's philosophy of right. And in order to dialectically negate Marx, one has to replace the words atheism, the words religion and man, by the words atheism and God. It must be inverted. And here's what God would say to Marx. I changed the word, I invert the words to give them their full dialectical meaning. The criticism of atheism disillusions God, so that he will think, act, and fashion his reality like a God who has discarded his illusions and regained his senses, so that he will move around himself as his own true sun. Atheism is only the illusory sun which revolves around God, as long as God does not revolve around himself. And that's quite profound, and it's a very heavy burden to be the negative and to be God. And but I have a hope. I don't know if it will be fulfilled, but God as this self-thinking being, this self-conceptualizing entity is, I said it in other videos, the only, not the only, because there are many things to say about God. One attribute that I could use to qualify God, which is improper, because it is God who must qualify himself in a Hegelian fashion. He must set and set his own determinations. It's not an external agent who must say what God is. It is God who must say to himself, I am that, or this and that, and beyond this and that. Yeah. Infinite intelligence. And infinite is not enough. It's the intelligence. How can intelligence beyond intelligence can emerge out of nothing? That's this is amazing. I have no other word. Amazing. And this is yeah, this is this is